The night was colder than usual. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, and the highway stretched endlessly under the dim glow of flickering streetlights. Cars zipped by, their headlights cutting through the thick fog that had settled over the road. But amid the rush, amid the honking and the roaring engines, there was someone, out of place. A boy. Barefoot, shivering and alone. His clothes were torn, his hair was messy, and his eyes held a kind of emptiness that sent a chill through the bones of anyone who dared to look. He stood at the edge of the highway, his small hands wrapped around his arms, trying to find warmth in a world that had clearly abandoned him. And then fate intervened. A sleek black car, its engine humming softly, slowed down. The driver had seen him. Inside, a man in his early 40s watched the boy through the windshield, his brows furrowing in concern. This man wasn't just anyone. He was a millionaire, a self-made businessman who had built his empire from the ground up. He had everything, a luxurious home, fast cars, a life most people could only dream of. But in that moment, all of it seemed meaningless compared to the sight of the helpless boy in the cold. Without a second thought, he pulled over. The boy didn't move. He barely even blinked as the man stepped out of his car and approached him. "Hey, kid," the man called out, his voice gentle but firm. "Are you okay?" The boy said nothing. He just stared, as if words had long lost their place in his world. The man crouched down, trying to meet the boy's gaze. "Where's your family? Are you lost?" Still silence. The businessman sighed, rubbing his chin as he thought. He could have easily driven away, pretended he never saw anything. But something about the boy, something about those eyes, kept him rooted in place. "All right," he finally said. "Come with me. You can't stay out here all night." For a moment, the boy hesitated. But then slowly, he took a step forward. Then another, until finally, he climbed into the car. As the car sped down the highway, the man glanced at the boy through the rearview mirror. He was curled up in the seat, his tiny body tense, as if he wasn't sure whether to trust this stranger who had just picked him up. The drive was quiet. Too quiet. And yet, the silence spoke volumes. By the time they arrived at the man's home, a grand estate with tall gates and shining windows, the boy's eyes widened ever so slightly. He had never seen a house like this before. The man led him inside, where warmth and the scent of freshly brewed coffee wrapped around them like a blanket. A housekeeper who had been setting the dining table turned in surprise. "Sir, who is this?" she asked, concern in her voice. The man hesitated. He hadn't thought that far ahead. He barely even knew what he was doing. All he knew was that he couldn't leave the boy out in the cold. "He's staying here tonight," he finally said. "Make him something warm to eat." The housekeeper nodded, her eyes scanning the boy before disappearing into the kitchen. The boy, still silent, looked around cautiously. "Do you have a name?" the man asked, hoping to break through whatever wall the child had built around himself. A pause. Then finally, a whisper. "Liam." It was barely audible, but it was something. The man smiled. "Liam. That's a good name." Liam didn't respond. Instead, he looked down at his feet, his fingers twisting together anxiously. The businessman knew he had a lot of questions. Who was this boy? Where had he come from? Why was he alone? But he also knew that pushing too hard would only make things worse. So for that night, he let it go. Days turned into weeks. The man, whose name Liam had learned was Ethan, found himself growing attached to the boy in ways he never expected. At first, he told himself it was temporary, that he would find out where Liam belonged and everything would go back to normal. But normal had changed. Liam was no longer just a boy he had picked up on the highway. He was becoming family. And then one evening, everything changed. Ethan had always come home late. Business meetings, phone calls, and deals kept him occupied until well past midnight. But that night, for the first time in a long time, he decided to come home early. As he stepped inside, expecting the usual quiet house, something felt off. The lights were dimmed, the house eerily still. Then he heard it. A sound. A whisper. And when he turned the corner, he froze. Liam wasn't alone. And whoever was with him wasn't supposed to be there. Ethan's blood ran cold. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. And in that moment, he realized the night he picked Liam up on the highway was only the beginning. Ethan stood frozen in the dim light of his living room. His breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight before him. Liam sat stiffly on the couch, his small hands gripping the edges of his seat. His eyes, usually filled with quiet wariness, now held something else, fear. And across from him sat a man Ethan had never seen before. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, with a face that looked like it had seen too much. There was a strange stillness about him, an unsettling air that sent alarm bells ringing in Ethan's head. The man turned slowly, his eyes locking onto Ethan's. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're home early," the man said, his voice calm, too calm. Ethan clenched his jaw. "Who are you?" Liam didn't speak. He just stared down at his lap, his fingers twisting together in a way that told Ethan this wasn't a guest he had invited. The man leaned back in his chair, completely at ease, as if he belonged there. "That's not the question you should be asking," he said smoothly. "The real question is, how much do you really know about the boy you brought into your home?" Ethan's muscles tensed. Something about the way the man said it made his stomach twist. He stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in. "I don't need to know anything except that he was alone and needed help," he said firmly. "Now I'm going to ask you one more time. Who are you?" The man chuckled softly and glanced at Liam. "You didn't tell him, did you?" Liam flinched. Ethan saw it. And that was all he needed to know. This wasn't someone Liam trusted. His patience snapped. "I don't know what's going on here, but I want you out of my house. Now." The man sighed, shaking his head as if Ethan was missing something obvious. Then he slowly stood up, slipping his hands into his pockets. "You're making a mistake," he said. "But I suppose you'll figure that out soon enough." Ethan didn't care about his warnings. He took a step closer, his voice low and firm. "Get out." The man studied him for a long moment before finally giving a small nod. "All right, but I'll be seeing you again." His gaze flickered toward Liam one last time before he walked past Ethan and out the door. The second the door closed, Ethan turned back to Liam. "Who was that?" Liam didn't answer. He was still staring at the floor, his shoulders hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller. Ethan crouched down in front of him, his voice softer now. "Liam, talk to me." Liam swallowed hard. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "He knows me." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He had known from the start that Liam had a past. Every kid did. But this was different. This was something darker. Something Liam was afraid to talk about. "Liam," he said carefully, "who is he?" Liam hesitated. Then slowly he lifted his eyes to meet Ethan's. And what Ethan saw there made his blood run cold. "He's looking for me," Liam murmured. "And he won't stop until he finds what he wants." Ethan didn't know what that meant. Not yet. But what he did know was that whatever Liam had been running from had just found them. The next few days were different. Ethan could feel it in the air, the way the energy in the house had shifted. Liam was quieter than usual, more withdrawn. Every little sound made him jump, and he barely spoke unless spoken to. Ethan didn't push him. He wanted to, but something told him that Liam needed time. He needed to trust that he was safe. But Ethan wasn't just going to sit back and do nothing. He started digging. Late at night, when the house was quiet, he sat in his office, searching for any trace of Liam's past. He went through missing child reports, news articles, anything that could tell him where this boy had come from. But there was nothing. It was like Liam didn't exist before the night Ethan found him on the highway. And that terrified him. Because if there was no record of Liam, then who was really looking for him one evening? Ethan was sitting in his study, staring at his laptop screen, when a notification popped up on his phone. Security alert. Someone was at the gate. Ethan's heart pounded as he pulled up the camera feed. And there, standing outside the tall iron gates of his estate, was the man from that night. Only this time, he wasn't alone. 2 more men stood beside him, dressed just like him, their expressions unreadable. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. They weren't just here for a conversation. They were here for something more. Ethan's grip tightened around his phone. His first instinct was to call security, to tell them to send these men away. But he knew that wouldn't be enough. Because if these people had come all the way here, they weren't going to leave without a fight. And upstairs in his room, Liam sat curled up against the window, watching the shadows beyond the gate. He knew. He had always known. That one day, they would come for him. Ethan's pulse pounded as he stared at the security feed. The men at the gate weren't just waiting. They were watching, calculating. They knew he was home. They knew Liam was inside. He had to act fast. Pushing back from his desk, he moved quickly through the house, taking the stairs 2 at a time. When he reached Liam's room, he found the boy sitting by the window, his knees pulled to his chest. He wasn't just looking at the gate, he was bracing himself. Ethan's stomach twisted. "Liam," he said carefully, keeping his voice steady, "I need you to tell me the truth. Who are they?" Liam didn't answer right away. Instead, he exhaled shakily, his fingers tightening around the fabric of his sleeves. "They're not going to leave," he whispered. Ethan kneeled in front of him. "Then we don't let them in." Liam finally met his eyes, his expression filled with something Ethan hadn't seen before, guilt. "You don't understand," Liam said. "They're not just looking for me. They're looking for something I have." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Liam hesitated, then slowly reached into the pocket of his worn-out hoodie. When he pulled his hand out, he was holding something small, a flash drive. Ethan's brows furrowed. "What's on it?" Liam swallowed hard. "Proof." The weight of that single word settled heavy in the room. Before Ethan could ask more, his phone buzzed again. Another security alert. The men were getting impatient. Ethan stood up, his mind racing. He had 2 choices: hand Liam over or fight back. And handing him over was never an option. "Come on," he said, holding out his hand. "We're leaving." Liam's eyes widened. "What? We can't." "We're not staying here while they try to force their way in," Ethan cut in. "I have another house upstate. We'll go there." Liam hesitated only for a second before nodding. Ethan grabbed his car keys, his instincts on high alert. Every second counted now. He led Liam through the back exit, moving quickly and quietly toward the garage. If they could get past the gates before those men realized, they had a chance. But fate had other plans. As soon as they stepped outside, a dark figure emerged from the shadows. Ethan barely had time to react before a sharp voice cut through the air. Going somewhere? Ethan turned, shielding Liam behind him. It was the same man from before, the one who had sat in his living room like he owned the place. Only this time, his polite act was gone. "You don't want to do this," Ethan warned, his jaw tight. The man smirked. "Actually, I do." He took a step closer, and Ethan could see it now, the glint of something metallic peeking from under his jacket. A chill ran down Ethan's spine, but he didn't back down. "I don't know what's on that drive," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. "But whatever it is, you're not getting it." The man let out a low chuckle. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be." Ethan's mind worked fast. He wasn't a fighter, but he wasn't helpless either. He had built his empire by being smart, by thinking ahead. And right now, thinking ahead meant creating a distraction. His grip tightened around his keys. "Liam," he murmured, just loud enough for the boy to hear. "On my signal, run to the car." Liam tensed behind him. The man in front of them tilted his head. "What are you?" Ethan didn't let him finish. In one swift motion, he hurled his keys toward the bushes, drawing the man's attention for a split second. That was all he needed. "Go," he shouted. Liam took off, sprinting toward the car. Ethan lunged forward, catching the man off guard as he'd shoved him back. It wasn't enough to knock him down, but it was enough to give them a head start. Ethan bolted after Liam, throwing open the driver's side door and slamming it shut just as the man recovered. Tires screeched against the pavement as Ethan floored it. The gates were still closed, but Ethan had built this house, and he knew every security feature inside and out. With one tap on his phone's dashboard app, the gates slid open just in time. The men outside scrambled, realizing too late what was happening. And then they were gone. The city lights blurred past them as Ethan drove, his hands gripping the wheel. Liam sat in the passenger seat, clutching the flash drive like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. After a long silence, Ethan finally asked, "Are you going to tell me what's on it?" Liam hesitated, then nodded. "It's evidence," he said quietly. "Against them." Ethan's stomach sank. "Who are they?" Liam's voice was barely above a whisper. "Bad people." Ethan exhaled sharply, his mind racing. He had stumbled into something much bigger than he'd realized. But there was no turning back now. He glanced at Liam, his jaw set with determination. "We'll figure this out," he said. "Together." Liam looked at him, then really looked at him, as if trying to believe his words. And for the first time since Ethan had found him on that cold highway, Liam let himself believe. The road stretched ahead of them, unknown and uncertain. But whatever was waiting for them at the end of it, they would face it together.